All Souls Unitarian Universalist Church, building community, inspiring growth, creating change. Here in the heart of Kansas City, we come together to create this hour of shared reflection so that we might be renewed in courage for these times and inspired to lives of greater dignity, higher purpose, deeper generosity, and more effective action. If you are new to Unitarian Universalism or to our congregation, we want to get to know you and share part of your journey. If this place is already your spiritual home, welcome once more. We need one another, and it is good to be together again. Because we care for one another's safety, our congregation is gathering online during this long season of coronavirus pandemic. Nevertheless, through the gifts of technology, we continue to celebrate community and connections as we lean into the values of justice, compassion, and reason. Together, we learn the love that has the power to overcome both loneliness in the heart and oppression in the world. Welcome to our service this morning. May the words and music and images that we offer today nourish our best selves, calling forth abundant wisdom and love. Arise, O souls, Good morning, and welcome to All Souls Online for 2021. Given the state of the streets and the weather this morning, our virtual gathering is probably a good thing. Happy New Year. May it be filled with good things and good news for all of us. My colleague, Reverend Sarah Lawal, who you met in July, offers this suggestion about resolutions for the new year. Because resolutions are such fragile and reproachful things, let us instead make promises of imagination. We could, for example, renew the sweet little dreams buried under the weight of this past year, as well as the larger hopes crushed in the sweeping tidal waves of 2020. Let us promise to hold on to the lessons that yet linger in the muck and beauty of it all. Perhaps we should promise to get outside every day, to drink in the cool air and look up at the sky, to hug trees and smell flowers, and to bring more green inside. Promise to water those plants too. Maybe promise to stay slow, to sit and stare, or to take more naps, to say no when we need to, and yes if we can. Should we promise to keep cooking and making bread, knitting, painting, writing, creative crafts, or just creative thoughts? What if we promise to love more freely, to say thank you for the little things and the big things every day? Maybe promise not to get too comfortable or too righteous, and to let in enough pain to stay fired up about the dream of belovedness, the vision of an emerging world where our liberation is bound up with everyone and everything, always beckoning us to see more clearly and know more deeply. Shall we promise to let the fires burn away the old crusty obstacles and excuses, to make space for new dreams, for all that imagination can conjure. Let's at least promise to notice the light and let it shine, to fan the flames of hope and cleanse the spirit, and let life begin again, renewed, gentle, following the promise of good into the next unknown. Let us promise to gather, to be here for each other, to worship together. As we kindle our chalices, let us make this promise of the imagination. To notice the light and let it shine, to fan the flame of hope, to cleanse the spirit and let life be renewed. I invite you to tell us all where your light is shining this day. Now let's join together in speaking once again our covenant promises to this community. Together we affirm,
goodwill is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
Will you join me now in a place of open-hearted thoughtfulness and deep pondering for a moment? We cannot leave the past year without acknowledging the great sadness that we have shared. 300,000 American lives cut short by the coronavirus pandemic. Grandparents and healthcare workers, parents and children, partners and friends, prisoners, nursing home residents, wedding guests, co-workers. The numbers are numbing, yet every one is a heartache, and each of us mourns. We must acknowledge, too, the sadness of more than 100 Black lives taken by police violence in our nation during the year just past. These, too, were children, parents, spouses, workers, students, friends. Because of what we do know, it feels impossible to trust where we do not know. Would a white person in the same circumstances be dead? That such a question goes unanswered is an additional heartache, and so we mourn. Also, we must acknowledge here in our own Kansas City community the death on Thursday night of a houseless man known to his community as Jack 6, whose blankets, tent, and spare clothing were removed by city workers, after which he died of exposure on a night with temperatures in the teens, leaving behind his faithful dog, Debo. You may have seen a video posted to our All Souls website this morning from Reverend Randy Fiki asking for donations of hats, gloves, coats, and other warm weather clothing. There is never anything wrong with being generous and helpful. If you have used coats to share, by all means, drop them off. Or you can also bring them to All Souls. They will wind up in the same distribution process. The All Souls Emergency Warming Center team are currently raising funds to supply small, relatively tent-safe propane heaters to members of the homeless community. These heaters are far better protection from dangerous weather than additional clothes, and we invite your contribution to this ongoing effort. Even better, call or email Mayor Quinton Lucas and the City Parks and Recreation Department and demand an end to the violent sweeps of homeless camps that steal the few resources these neighbors have been able to pull together, including their identification, their medicine, their clothing and blankets, and their improvised shelters, leaving them completely exposed to the weather with no alternative options. The few existing local shelters are filled beyond capacity, and even our own emergency warming center is not operating because of COVID restrictions. You can find out more at the website of Kansas City Homeless United and consider joining the protesters seeking an end to the sweeps at Mayor Lucas's home. Mr. Six was a regular at the Washington Park food distribution picnic. It is believed that he is the fourth person to freeze to death in Kansas City so far this winter. They too were friends and helpers to others. They died at the hands of a system more committed to protecting property than lives. And so we mourn. Let us be with the sorrows of the year, in silent reflection and in music for a few moments together now. May those who departed from this life rest in peace and power. May the love and justice that we can no longer share with them be generously shared with those who now have need of it and of us. May their memories be for a blessing as we take up this waiting year and renew our work to become the people they believed we could be and build the world they dreamed for all of us. Like the ancient god Janus, for whom it is named, the month of January looks both backwards and ahead, seeing with dual vision both the past and the future. This wisdom teaches us that even as we honor the memories of all that is now gone, so must we take account of the blessings that we carry forward into a new year and a new decade. Even as I more and more intensely miss being together with all of you in person in our own dear Conover Hall and Bragg Auditorium, I am so very grateful for all the work and generosity that has made it possible for us to stick together and be there for each other through the hardships of this year. I am grateful for the technology that allows us to gather even when I don't entirely understand it, and grateful for those who do understand it. I am grateful for staff members who have been willing and able to do their work from home and to help keep our building safe. I am grateful to everyone who has reached out to others in the congregation to offer connection and care. I am grateful to the leaders on the board and in teams and committees who have wrestled with how to keep the engines running and the mission on track in spite of all the roadblocks and challenges. I am grateful to the artists of all kinds who have enriched our long-distance worship with their gifts. I am grateful to everyone who believes in the future of this covenant community and is counting the Sundays until we can once again gather without danger. I am more grateful than I can ever say to those whose ongoing generosity has made it possible for us to be responsible, compassionate employers to our devoted staff and to invest in the equipment and resources we need in order to keep calm and carry on. I believe that the day is coming when we will hug and laugh and sing together again with new friends as well as old. If you believe that too, and if you are as grateful as I am for all that keeps us going, I urge you to make as generous a gift as you can to the work of All Souls. You can also contribute to support the Emergency Warming Center or our Hunger Outreach team. For this little while, we don't have building rentals or big event fundraisers to augment our budget. What we have is you and our commitment to each other and to this community and its future. In that assurance of blessing, our offering for this morning will now be gratefully received. Let's say together the words of dedication for our offering. We dedicate our offerings and our actions to the mission at the heart of this congregation, to build a respectful, caring community, to inspire personal and spiritual growth, and to create change toward a just and compassionate society.
From Holy the Firm by Annie Dillard. A blur of romance clings to notions of publicans, sinners, the poor, the people in the marketplace, our neighbors, as though, of course, God should reveal himself, if at all, to these simple people, these Sunday school watercolor figures who are so purely themselves in their tattered robes, who are single in themselves, while we now are various, complex, and full at heart. Who shall ascend into the hill of the Lord? Or who shall stand in his holy place? There is no one but us. There is no one to send, nor a clean hand, nor a pure heart on the face of the earth, but only us. A generation comforting ourselves with the notion that we have come at an awkward time, that our innocent fathers are all dead, as if innocence had ever been, and our children busy and troubled, and we ourselves unfit, not yet ready, having each of us chosen wrongly, made a false start, yielded to impulse and the tangled comfort of pleasures, and grown exhausted, unable to seek the thread, weak and involved. But there is no one but us. There never has been. There have been generations which remembered and generations which forgot. There has never been a generation of whole men and women who lived well for even one day. Yet some have imagined well, with honesty and art, the details of such a life and have described it with such grace that we mistake vision for history, dream for description, and fancy a life that has devolved. So, you learn this, studying any history at all, especially the lives of artists and visionaries. You learn it from Emerson, who noticed that the meanness of our days is itself worth our thought, and you learn it fitful in your church pews.
Dead Stars by Limon. Out here, there's a bowing, even the trees are doing. Winter's icy hand at the back of all of us. Black bark, slick yellow leaves, a kind of stillness that feels so mute it's almost in another year. We point out the stars that make Orion as we take out the trash, the rolling containers, a song of suburban thunder. It's almost romantic as we adjust the waxy blue recycling bin until you say, man, we should really learn some new constellations. And it's true. We keep forgetting about Antilia, Centaurus, Draco, Lacerta, Hydra, Lyra, and Lynx. But mostly, we're forgetting we're dead stars too. My mouth is full of dust, and I wish to reclaim the rising, to lean in the spotlight of streetlight with you toward what's larger within us, toward how we were born. Look, we are not unspectacular things. We've come this far, survived this much. What would happen if we decided to survive more, to love harder? What if we stood up with our synapses and flesh and said no? No to the rising tides, stood for the many mute mouths of the sea, of the land. What would happen if we used our bodies to bargain for the safety of others, for Earth, if we declared a clean night, if we stopped being terrified, if we launched our demands into the sky and made ourselves so big that people could point to us, with the arrows they make in their minds, rolling their trash bins out after all of this is over.
I will rise with all my daughters. I will rise against my foes. I will rise with all the mothers. I will carry all their woes. I will rise to fight for freedom. I will rise though faced with fears. I will rise against all hatred. While my eyes are veiled in tears. I will rise for religious freedom, for a rich diversity. I will rise for all the weary, for each lonely refugee. I will work for all our women who deserve equal pay. I will work for all our children who await a better day. Oh, stand with me, rise up hand in hand. Oh, stand with me. We will fight to spread love across this bitter land. I will rise for love and justice, that we may see a better day. I will rise in peace and service, for our world in disarray. I will rise with all my sisters, for all those who cannot stand. I will rise with all our brothers who have lost a home and land. I will rise to build up bridges for this broken world we see. I will tear down walls between us that divide you and me. Sisters, oh, stand with me. Rise up hand in hand. Oh, stand with me. We will fight to spread love across this bitter land. Oh, stand with me. Rise up hand in hand. Oh, stand with me. We will fight to spread love across this bitter land. We will rise.
Okay, there is no denying that it was a huge satisfaction to say, you are out of here to the year 2020. I was looking forward to it, and I was glad when it happened. And yes, the new year has a certain quality of blank slate, the unwritten page, the newly fallen, unbroken blanket of white snow. Choices to be made, new possibilities. Things could be different from before. There is a certain shallow, secular, cheap salvation in that thought, that somehow we can leave the blunders and harms of the past behind us and begin again with a new calendar and a list of resolutions. However, as the wisdom of the obvious reminds us, wherever you go, there you are, along with all the baggage that you bring. The task of religion, as the word itself reminds us, is to reconnect. It does not specify what or who to connect, and some folks think it's only about connecting human beings with the gods. Some folks think it's just about connecting us to each other, building communities of shared meaning and care. As you may have heard me say before, I think all that much is true, but there's a lot more to it. I believe that religion is about connecting us to that interdependent web we talk about, not just the human social one, but the universal one, all the way down to the tiniest atoms and cells and vibrations, and all the way out to the galaxies and black holes and light from stars that haven't existed for 1 million years. It's about reconnecting us to our own ideals and values when we have gotten confused and lost track of them. It's about reconnecting the committee of voices that lives in our own minds, often pulling us in different directions, shouting their insistent demands. It's about reconnecting us across time, to both the past and the future, to our own story, like the ghost of Christmas past haunting Scrooge with the formative turning points of his life, as well as the heroes and wisdom of our collective history, so that we might cherish the heritage entrusted to us. And to the future that we prepare for those who will come after us, for our own future selves, for our children and descendants, and for all the beings who will inherit the planet long after our own lives are over. It's about reconnecting to the moments of transcendence and reverence that illuminate the ordinariness of our days, and to the grief of loss that makes memory sacred. Religion, rightly understood, has to do with reconnection in all of these dimensions, with the notion that our best possible lives happen when we sustain all those connections with intention and practice. Today, on this first Sunday of the new year, I want us to consider yet another dimension into which religion properly invites us, which is to reconnect not only to our positive ideals and values, but also with our traumas and moral injuries. To begin with the personal, one of the most memorable spiritual moments of my own life occurred at the end of my first watching the movie Schindler's List. As the actors in the movie joined the actual survivors among the characters they had played, observing the Jewish custom of placing a small stone on someone's grave as a gesture of honor, in this case, the grave of Oskar Schindler, it was clear to me that this was a holy moment, both in the film and for me right then. I longed deeply to be able to recite the words of the Kaddish, or indeed any ancient prayer that held the weight of human suffering and grief. I wanted desperately a word or gesture of confession, of assent to a prophetic accusation that the people had done evil, unholy things, and defiled ourselves and called down the judgment of a righteous God. I felt in that instant of religious hunger that my own faith tradition, with its relentless optimism about the human transformation, was leaving me bereft, without the vocabulary or the resource that I so needed. Part of the task of an authentic religious community over time is clearly to help us envision our ethical ideals and then to live by them. We need to be able to describe the kind of person each of us wants to be, to imagine what that sort of wholeness, literally integrity, would be like, and how to move in that direction. This is the impulse behind those aspirational New Year's resolutions. As Ben Franklin's almanac put it, each year one vicious habit rooted out, in time, might make the worst man good throughout. It is a common human experience to find that we often do not do the good we wish to do, but do things that do not reflect our best intentions. An essential part of reconnecting to my ideals is recognizing the ways in which I have not adhered to them and am indeed not yet the fully realized human being that I aspire to become. This is why the concept of self-examination and confession shows up as part of religious practice across many different traditions. Of course, I was not a mid-20th century Nazi in Germany. I wasn't a slave owner in the 18th century colonial South, nor an Indian fighter in the army on the 19th century American frontier. And yet, the history with which we must reconnect is not just personal, it is collective, which is where cultural trauma and moral injury enter the equation. The word trauma derives from the Greek for wound, and it can refer to both physical and psychological damage. Psychological trauma describes a certain set of characteristic responses that may or may not appear in reaction to a particular injury. It is not the event per se, but the way it is experienced by a person or group that constitutes trauma. The experience is one of extreme and inescapable damage, fear and danger that threatens survival, that overwhelms the victim's available resources and coping mechanisms to stop or prevent or make sense of or repair. When it goes unhealed, such an experience remains a present disabling reality in the victim's consciousness, making many kinds of normal personal functioning very difficult. Cultural trauma happens when such an experience is collective, becomes multi-generational, and defines a group's memories and identity. For the purposes of this discussion, I am thinking of moral injury as in some ways the other side of this coin. It is what happens to a person who is coerced to participate in creating or inflicting trauma, despite holding values which would suggest that doing so is wrong. This is not an either-or dichotomy. I suspect the reality is that most of us suffer from both personal and cultural psychological trauma and moral injury. Neither one prevents the other. None of us is freed of the consequences of trauma by flipping the page on a calendar. A new year, like a new day, offers possibilities, but does not wipe away the damage of the past. Wherever we go, there we are, and there too is the trauma encoded in our bodies and minds and spirits until we acknowledge it and become willing to do the work of grief and healing. Faith may be able to help with the deeply inner work of healing personal trauma, but the real power of religion is found in addressing cultural trauma. Historians tell us that there was a time when public religious practice was about ritual and sacrifice, placating the spirits with wealth and blood and proper ceremony in order to get benefits like fertility, prosperity, and health, and the world in its sustained order. It didn't matter how much of a scoundrel you might be if you knew the right prayers and had an unblemished goat. Then, at the axial age, maybe 4 to 6 centuries before the Common Era, a new spiritual perspective emerged in multiple different traditions, claiming that what the gods demand is obedience to moral commandments and ethical behavior. This is the shift articulated by the prophet Amos when he says on behalf of Israel's God, I despise your feasts. I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me your burnt offerings and your grain offerings, I will not accept them. And the peace offerings of your fattened animals I will not look upon. Take away from me the noise of your songs. To the melody of your harps I will not listen. But let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Many of those traditions then quickly became obsessed with personal salvation and individual orthodoxy and conformity, so that moral failure was then seen as a uniquely individual problem with uniquely individual consequences, such as an afterlife of suffering in hell or a series of painful reincarnations. But there has always been another strand of religious community as a corporate identity, with moral responsibility focused not on the private conscience, but on the way a society is structured. Turning again to the prophets of the Hebrew scriptures, if the judges are corrupt and oppress the poor, selling the needy for a pair of sandals and allowing the widows and orphans to starve, it's not only the judges who are in trouble. These things are a wrong that God holds against the whole community, even those who are seemingly not directly involved. The collective trauma of the marginalized is the doing of all who have power and resources. Everyone who benefits from the system is implicated. The sins that anger God, or injure the interdependent web, if you like, are not personal failures, so much as they are collective manifestations of privilege, power, and dominance. And they are not problems that individual remorse or penance will fix either. To correct them will require cooperative effort that must take institutional form. And creating that institutional form is where we need the power of imagination and the commitment of faith to the belief that something different is possible. That is the place for our New Year dreams, the audacious, inclusive vision that we are not unspectacular beings. That is the place to wonder, what if? What if we stopped being terrified? What if we decided to love harder, to launch our demands into the sky and write them on the stars like constellations, so large that other people wheeling out the detrisses of their private concerns could point to them brilliant in the sky? What if we decided to rise in the power of community and compassion, in the name of justice and what is larger within us? it would be perhaps spectacular. It might be that justice would roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. But here's the catch. Annie Dillard is right. There is no one but us. There is no one to send, not a clean hand nor a pure heart on the face of the earth, but only us. A generation comforting ourselves with the notion that we have come at an awkward time, that our innocent fathers are all dead, as if innocence had ever been, and our children busy and troubled, and we ourselves unfit, not yet ready, having each of us chosen wrongly, made a false start, yielded to impulse and the tangled comfort of pleasures, and grown exhausted, unable to seek the thread, weak and involved. It's all true. We are complicit and compromised by our participation in a system we did not choose and did not design. If you are white, if you are male, if you have any education or money, if you have so much as a place to sleep tonight without freezing to death, then you have experienced moral injury. You have been made to play a part in maintaining the gears of oppression, whether you ever meant to or not, whether you want to or not, no matter what good you have tried to do or done. Even war is a teacher if we attend to its lessons. It has been war that taught us much of what we know about dealing with wounded bodies, how to keep people alive and put them back together and make it so that they can run marathons with only one leg. We learn such things because we have to, because we do these things to each other in the name of whatever it is we are fighting for this time. We learned to talk about moral injury from soldiers too, from their common reluctance to talk about what they saw and heard and did in Vietnam or Abu Ghraib or Gitmo. Moral injury is what happens when you are in a situation where you can't figure out how not to do something you are pretty sure is wrong. Moral injury is when your commanding officer tells you that you have to shoot the children because one of them has a bomb. Or when you have to watch waterboarding because it's not your call and you're on duty that night. Moral injury is also what happens when one of your parents beats your sibling and you can't stop it. Moral injury is when you have sex for money so you can buy your hungry kid a hamburger. And it happens when you laugh along with the others when the bully humiliates the geeky kid because you're afraid they will humiliate you if you don't. It's everywhere when you know to look for it, know what to call it. This is why New Year's Day is not a blank page or a clean slate. Because wherever you go, there you are, and your collective trauma and your moral injury too. That is why we need to reconnect, because these things make us uncomfortable when we become aware of them, but as long as they are hidden, they make it impossible for us to rise. They stunt the promises of our imaginations, our vision of what might be possible, our ability to scan the stars and find new constellations, to decide to survive more and love harder. If we feel like we didn't survive, if our minds and hearts are still captured in that awful, helpless feeling moment of fear and pain, if we forget that we've come this far, then how will we reclaim the rising? The rising, which is the only thing that could save us all. Confession, then. confession, contrition, lamentation, repentance, the work of grief for the ones who didn't survive, for the tracks that evil has carved into our common memories. Requiem for the 300,000 that the virus has killed because some of us did not believe it was possible. Remorse that someone, a city worker, would take the blanket from a freezing man, from 4 of them, in your name and mine. For the 14 million at the hands of the Third Reich and the 12 million stolen from the shores of Africa, for the 300 massacred at Wounded Knee, and the 38 Sioux warriors executed by Lincoln, the great liberator. There is, after all, no one but us. Our ancestors were no better. They are who we inherited the trauma from. Nor have we spared the next generation from this almost invisible legacy. There is only us, and there is no starting over back at the beginning before everything went wrong. Not last Thursday at midnight, not at noon 2.5 weeks from now. No day on the calendar will ever be that. No private resolution of greater effort, however stern, will absolve us. We carry this wounding in our muscle memory and at our heart's core. We pass it along in our DNA and our mother's milk. It is embedded in our laws and our language, enacted by our customs and our commerce, our education and our entertainment. There is no one but us. And to free ourselves, we must arise into consciousness. We must reconnect with the trauma of our history and of our own time. For only so can we unlock the power of imagination to see a new pattern in the stars and dream of changing the world as we know it. Faith understands what the impulse of self-protection resists, that to reconnect to our pain and grief is to reconnect to our creative power, that until we acknowledge both the trauma and the moral injury that together shape us, we will almost never have access to the promise of the imagination that might save us. We are finite in so many ways. We are mortal, and our days are numbered. We are often misguided and mistaken. We are easily confused and puzzled, and rarely have the stamina to do even the limited good that we do understand. We are wounded by the cruel logic of systems that we unknowingly replicate for the sake of comfort and privilege, even when we already half suspect that their sweetness is poison to us as well as to others. We are dubious heroes at best, and yet there is no one but us, complicit and compromised and injured as we are, starting not with the clean slate of a new year, but with a tangled history of suffering, unacknowledged and unresolved. I don't know where this leaves you, but it takes me back to some fragments of familiar prayer. And forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who have trespassed against us. Or help us to love our enemies, not by countenancing their sins, but by remembering our own. Until we give up the quest for innocence and righteousness, we can't rise. Until we give up the hunger for revenge and justification, we can't rise. Until we acknowledge the collective trauma that we continue to suffer and to perpetuate, we may remain trapped and afraid as a culture. And that fear is showing up in our streets with tiki torches and guns. Oh, friends, if we would release all the energy that this nation is spending to repress our collective memories and silence the prophets of conscience, what could we not accomplish? If our faith, or any faith, has any value to add to the human condition, it must be the courage to help each other face into the moral injury that holds us all helpless, while the soulless machine of greed and oppression sucks the power from our collective imagination. If there were some better, innocent, unwounded people somewhere, perhaps we could argue that it was their job. But we know very well that there is no one but us, and so it is we who must rise. Rise into the discomfort of acknowledgement and confession. Rise into the work of grief and healing. Rise into the vision of a mighty task and a holy earth for all who share the hope of this new year and the justice and peace that humanity might yet proclaim. Will you sing with me?
The tide is rising, and so are we. The tide is rising, and so are we. The tide is rising, and so are we. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called to be. The storm is raging, and so are we.
My colleague, Reverend Suzelle Lynch, offers these words of blessing. Imagination is our human superpower, the power to envision a new way, a new day, a new creation, perhaps even a world transformed. How will we use this power? May our imagination arise to serve the greater good. helping peace, equity, hope, and beauty come to all our neighbors. May the chalice flame that abides in our minds and hearts shine imagination's power across our community and all around the whole wide world. So be it. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fires of commitment. For all these we carry in our minds and hearts until the time shall come when we will be together again. Thank you for being part of our gathering this morning. We hope that you will join us now for informal conversation on Zoom at the link posted in the chat or found at our All Souls website homepage. We also hope you will be with us next Sunday when the topic will be chosen by Marilyn Carpenter, the winner of last year's auction sermon. Also, plan to attend the final Yulebach gathering of the year, our annual gratitude celebration, next Sunday immediately following the service, including special awards, the burning of the goat, and s'mores. In the meantime, please everybody, take care, stay safe, and be well this week.